Man, interesting, really interesting and different feel right off the bat here than I think you see most of the time. The art direction is immediately reminiscent of maybe something like Bloodborne. I'd say is maybe the closest example I could give you, but it's got this weird, like steampunk, Italy, but like kind of like Victorian England mashed into it thing going on.
Can't forget the good French in there.
There's a bit of that too, although not as much as the one of the other games we're going to be talking about. But this game is probably the best. There's been a lot of kind of Dark Souls sort of imitators out there. A lot of games that you dub them Souls likes that try and kind of follow that formula. But I think this might be the best not from software game to do that. It manages to have a level of smooth precision to it that it gets all the clunkiness out of some of those other copycats. That's all that's gone. And starring Timothy Chalamet as Pinocchio, you get this really great combat system. It's kind of messing with parries a little bit like how Sekiro does, where there's a little bit of a greater focus on that. But it also has this kind of second tiered like weapon system with, I mean, I'm just going to call it like a Winter Soldier arm that you can like augment and attach all these different things to. Uh, and that's kind of reminiscent of like the gun system in Bloodborne just a little bit, where it's like a secondary kind of like counter effect that you have. Um, this game was a huge surprise. It kind of came out of nowhere. It was one of those, kind of like the other game we're going to talk about tonight, where they announced it and maybe 10 months later, like not even a full year, they released it. And it feels like, hey, you get something from a smaller studio. It was at like $59.99, so a lower price point than like the average for games right now. And it feels more finished and complete and lacking in like bugs and stuff. And also the higher price pointed games.
And I would say that there is a lot of comparison to Bloodborne, and I would argue that Bloodborne was definitely FromSoft's first take at Bloodborne. But this, Lies of P, was able to kind of take the system introduced with that and refine it a little bit more. This game is nothing if not an example in polish. And you can kind of see that both in the cinematics, in the score, in the motion capturing done for some of these cutscenes. Everything is attention to detail, and that comes across with the gameplay systems as well, because every little feature does blend in well to all the other features. Nothing feels washed out or forgotten. Everything is allowed to thrive equally or synergistically in this environment. And it leads to some really fluid combat, some really interesting combat that you can approach it a number of different ways, and no way is incorrect. You're not going to be looking up a build guide for this game. You're not going to be looking for what the best weapon is, unless you get stuck on a couple different bosses. But this is a game that really promotes creativity and changing up how you play to approach a problem from a different angle. There's definitely some of what makes Dark Souls good, and that is kind of its callbacks to Castle or Metroidvania style shortcuts. Each level is designed, this world as a whole is designed to feel like it's all connected. And when you kind of circle back on an area, you are left with that same sense of accomplishment that games you might have played before kind of give. But you aren't necessarily left thinking solely of other games that you've played. This is a new experience, and it's definitely one I didn't anticipate ahead of time.
it does forge its own new identity despite having inspirations in other things. And that's one of the cool things about this too is even though like obviously right off the bat, Pinocchio, right? Dark fantasy Pinocchio, that's the pitch. But you get some really interesting I think the game's been out for 2 years, so I think we can talk about some of these without worrying about spoilers, really. But they fold in some other kind of like Victorian era stuff into this. Like there's very much a Frankenstein sort of, or both a scientist and a monster sort of thing here. There's even a boss that I felt like was an allusion to a Bride of Frankenstein sort of character in here. I see some Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type stuff. It really it's an interesting blend of influences because you get your storybook stuff, but it's mixed with that sort of Penny Dreadful style as well.
Mm. So what is fully the story base? It takes inspiration from things like Pinocchio, The Adventures of Pinocchio there. What's kind of the main driving plot or narrative of this?
So you wake up on a train, right? That's your very opening, and you got to make your way to this hotel in the center of the city, and you're trying to find your creator Geppetto in the midst of kind of a robot apocalypse is generally how I describe it. It is
Yeah.
like the whole city uh, has this kind of steampunk element to it. They clearly were relying. They call them puppets all in the game, but they were clearly relying the society on animatronics, kind of all over the place. And something happened to cause them to just go berserk and kill all the people. So it is also that sort of kind of Dark Souls style thing where the world has ended somewhat and you are making your way through the aftermath of this destruction, slowly kind of piecing together what exactly caused this set of events to go down. Why did everything go wrong? And as you piece it together, it's a really interesting story of there's that element of how much humanity do these creations have, right? How much of a soul are they really? And of course you are playing as the one that is the most riding the line between being human and being machine. uh and there's some good twists. I don't want to give everything away, but you find Geppetto pretty early on, and from there you get sent to there's this like society of alchemists that seems to be connected to what's going on, and perhaps someone intentionally caused this to happen. Like I said, I don't want to give everything away, but there is a bit of a like elitist kind of like alchemist conspiracy kind of going on as you start to piece things together.
And simultaneously, there is also this epidemic or pandemic that's broken out. And this released a couple years after the pandemic had broken out. So there was a lot of that kind of parallel where the fragmented survivors are all living in relative isolation. Nobody knows if anyone else is alive. And it is, as Sage said, very much so a world in decay that is far past its prime, and you are left wandering through the streets of a city of splendor. This was like the crown jewel of technology in the world at its height. And shortly after, or shortly before this game starts, it's actually the World Fair is supposed to be taking place in this city. And within a span of a couple weeks, things have landed at the state that they're in. And just kind of
And that's
unraveling that decay.
Geppetto right there.
Yes.
Yep, that is Geppetto.
And much so like the other Pinocchios, this also too looks at the nature of humanity and, in no lesser part, the soul, what defines a soul. And it even takes a little bit of a look at the panpsychism, or the concept that everything in the universe is capable of consciousness when there is enough ability for complex thought and information gathering. And you create these flawless automatons that are built to be these combat monstrosities. They're built to create art, and they're built to supersede humans on every level. Well, then doesn't that make them something more than human? And it really does revel in that kind of philosophical debate. The core of the game is the lies that Pinocchio tells and how they relate to innate humanity, and that kind of look at the human condition and what all of this means, overlaid with some beautiful music, overlaid with great visuals and refined gameplay mechanics, makes it for something that honestly eclipsed what I was expecting, especially from a studio I hadn't really seen anything from before.
This might be their first game, actually. I'll double check that while we're talking here. But another, element to it with the lying is that that is fully a gameplay mechanic in the game too. There's several points in, with several different NPCs you talk to throughout the game where you get a chance to tell them the truth or lie to them, and it does have an effect on how your character progression evolves, certain upgrades that you're able to get, and definitely has a lot of effect on like dialogue choices and how other characters respond to you as the game goes on.
Mm. And this game was developed by NeoWise and Round 8 Studio. It says here NeoWise is a let's see, holding company here from Korea as well. There, so you get that. It's a combination of that.
Yeah,
Um,
New is the publisher, and then Round Eight is the actual developer. It looks like they've only done two games. The other one is like a MMO, like online MMO game that came out in 2020. So yeah, this is only the second game they've done, and it's a very different style from the other game that they've done.
this game came out a few years ago. Came out a couple of years ago. There, 2023 is when this kind of came. Yeah.
I forget who it was in your chat, but like 2 years ago, someone was asking, "Are you guys going to review this at some point?" And you can tell them how we did.
Yeah. Very nice. So you said that it very much kind of has that Souls like kind of look to it, very much inspired by that. Does it do enough of its own thing? Is it creative enough to kind of be memorable there? Except for
I think so. I think it's the best Souls imitator, I honestly, that anybody has done. Certain things like the lying mechanics, the kind of Winter Soldier arm that you can augment, and there's a bunch of different versions of it and equipment you can assign to it. And even just the way that your weapon upgrade system works, where you can like take the handles and the blades off of weapons and attach them to each other and create different kind of combinations of weapons. That's super interesting. That's very different from anything in Souls. Um, and I'll also say, this game has its moments, especially in the like last fourth or so. Like you're getting really close to the end. There's a couple of tough bosses, but I would actually say that the majority of this game is easier and more new player friendly than a lot of the Souls games are. Unless you're doing like specifically Demon Souls or I'd say it's either Demon Souls or Elden Ring. Some of the tutorializing in Souls games can be a little hard. Like it's a lot. Those
Yeah.
games are much easier if you start with Demon Souls or Elden Ring, learn how they work, and then jump into the other ones. But this one I think does a really good job of, even if this was like your first game of this style, I think it does a much better job of teaching you how to play without making it overwhelming. And overall, it does have less like systems than like say Elden Ring, especially is the most recent one. It's not as complicated as that, but you still get a lot of satisfaction out of the systems that it does have. And in some ways, that's better. It's more digestible. I probably wouldn't tell most people to start with Elden Ring because of how big and complicated it is. But yeah, I mean, I think it does stand alone and stand apart creatively. From its gameplay to its visual, its art aesthetic, really, really everything. It even is honestly, for me personally, narratively a little more directly engaging than the Souls games. Um,
I would agree.
yeah, well, and then you follow up with this, Tim, because I know you were thinking the exact same thing. But in a lot of the Souls games, you really got to put those stories together yourself. You got to hunt and read things and kind of study the environment to understand what's going on. Unless you have Tim playing with you, we can just explain it to you like I did. But This game, it tells you its story. There are cutscenes, the NPCs are a lot less vague about what's going on. So, if you're looking for, if you're not looking to really have to do research to understand what's happening, this is a great alternative to that franchise or those types of games because I think it's interested in very directly presenting its narrative to you in a way that the Souls games just don't. They're just not trying to. That's just
Yeah.
going for a different type of story.
And I would say that they kind of, in a lot of ways, seem to have been looking at Bloodborne more specifically, but Souls from soft properties more in general, looking for what could be polished, what could be refined, what could be evolved. And you kind of come across the narrative, and that is an excellent example of that, because one thing that is a really common piece of feedback is the story is too vague. You have to go out of the way. You're having to look at environmental design, like who inspired this architecture and what narrative parallels does that cultural uh, context provide. Um, you don't have to know archaeology for this one. You don't have to know French history. You don't have to know Pinocchio. You can look at item descriptions. You can listen to a plethora of dialogue that's available that is expertly voice acted, and you can choose to. There's cutscenes. There is a story being told. You can seek out the nuances and depth of it, but the core of the story is not locked behind you playing the entire game all in one section or looking up a lore summary afterwards or checking the forums to see what people agree on. Uh, like for as much as I knew about the Dark Souls games, I looked at lore videos. I had to engage with other people in discussion about some of the more uh, obfuscated answers and conclusions. This one, it doesn't bother hiding any of it, and I think that really, really does it a service, because they're able to simultaneously tell a story but also tell one that has the divergent endings of a Souls game, or has the different character paths in terms of, are you more human or are you staying more loyal to your programming? And it allows for the characters that are involved in this. Like, you're not just going to come across Clagger and he's going to talk to you 5 times in the Firelink Shrine before attacking you for some reason. And that's the
You
extent
don't
of
even
the
know
story.
why.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, I guess Clagger's evil now. But in this game, you come back to the hub that is gradually filled with all these people you've discovered or other survivors that have made their way to this hotel. And you do gradually get to learn their stories. You learn how the interconnected nature of all the survivors uh, grows. And by the time the game is ending, you're just kind of left really thinking about the story in a way that you can't say you did with a Dark Souls game. You're not like, oh, I linked the flame, I restarted another cycle. What does that mean?
And a DLC is planned to come out summer 2025. You do have that. It's going to be a prequel story, so you do have that there.
You can
Um,
even see like the spot in the game where you're probably going to go to trigger the start of it. There's like a just like in Dark Souls, you have these spots that you rest, refill your items, but it'll bring enemies back, that kind of thing. But there's like a broken one that you can't use like midway through the game. It's like a very obviously, I think, going to be where the DLC starts.
yeah. So right now, I see that this game, I see it on Steam for $60. This game is a couple years old, so I don't see a discount for it. You think $60? That's pretty good for this? People to pick full price?
I would say it does
Personally,
go
I
on
think it's
sale,
totally worth it,
but
and it does go on sale.
I would say that it is absolutely worth a buy. There's far worse ways to waste your $60, and I wouldn't call it a waste in this case.
Mm.
Plus,
And
that's still $10 less than the base price of most games now. So it's still setting itself a little bit lower. And when I got it, it was I think only 35. So it still goes on. It does go on sale regularly if you watch for it.
Okay. So you got that. So maybe be on the lookout. Maybe during the Black Friday deal. Maybe they'll put that on sale since the DLC's coming out. Maybe they'll do that. With
I'm
that.
sure there will be like an edition that comes with everything packaged in too.
Yeah. So Tim, did you play it on PC or you played it on console?
I played it on console.
All right. And same thing with you. Sage, you played it on console
Yep.
there. You played it on
I don't have a
PlayStation.
PC, sadly.
Yeah. Did you both play it on PlayStation?
Yes.
Okay. And no glitches, no bugs, no anything like that?
I
None
didn't
that I
run
could
into
remember.
one performance issue. Yeah, and I'm not one time did I have the game lock up or freeze on me. It's a smooth 60 frames per second too that entire time. So like your inputs are always coming out and being read properly by the game. Um, yeah, no, I really had no technical problems. Now, to be fair, I also played this year. I did not play it when it came out in 2023. Tim, did you play it? You played it when it first came out?
Yeah,
And it even then you didn't
day
experience any like
one, it
bugs or
was
glitches.
seamless. It's not often that you see a game that needs no hot fixes nowadays, and this was right out of the gate, crystal polish.
Very cool. So I'll give you get you guys final thoughts and rating. Tim, what's your final thoughts and rating for Lies of P?
I think it's cinema. Also, not in part due to the cinematics in this game are cinema to me. I mean, I am fully engaged with every piece of story this thing has to offer, and I do truly think that if this were a movie, it would be on a lot of people's must-watch list. If it was a book, it would be on a best sellers list. But it's a game, and it is a must-play for me because it is cinema.
High praise. So what's the highest score we got? This is cinema. Highest score you can give anything. Sage, are you going to follow that? But you're also going to give it a this is cinema. Where are you landing?
You know what? I think I am actually. I thought I was surprised by just how good this was. Especially, you hear the concept like dark fantasy Pinocchio video game, and you're like, huh, that's interesting. I wonder how good that actually is. It's a studio you never heard of before, but it really made an impact. I struggle to really think of any issues I had with it. Obviously, performance we just said ran really smooth the entire time. Stories is engaging. The combat mechanics are engaging, and also digestible and thoughtful. The art is beautiful. The sound design is incredible with this. Yeah. I mean, it really. I mean, if they do a movie, you're gonna get Timothy Chalamet in there. Like that has to be what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if this is up there for like one of the games that's gonna be adapted, just because it's already based on something that's been adapted. Yeah, I would say the only thing holding it back is even though it's not as hard as the other Souls games, it is still a more difficult game than maybe your average video game in general. And so that is still going to make the audience a little more niche than, than say, your Final Fantasy coming out or your God of War or whatever, like it is going to still, the difficulty is still going to keep some people from trying it or engaging with it too much. But I do think it is more casual friendly than most of the actual Souls games. So it's only being held back a little bit by that. But I think I would give it to This Is Cinema. This would go on my top 10 of 2023 for sure.
Wow. So, games there. And this game did get great reviews. So when it came out in 2023 there. Um, and so yeah, a lot of people did really like this game when it first kind of came out. So you did have that. It was nominated for 7 year-end accolades, including the Game Awards and the Golden Joystick Awards there. So you did have that going on with that. It had a Metacritic score there out of 100. You had it on PS 5 there, 80 out of 100. You had it on also XSX there. You got an 85 out of 100 score. Open Critic 82%. So for the Game Awards in 2023, it was nominated for Best Art Direction. It was nominated for Best Role Playing Game. It didn't win that category there. The Game Developer Choice Awards, it was had an honorable mention for Best Visual Art. Gamescom Awards, it did pretty well. Won Best Action Adventure Game, Best Role Playing Game, Most Wanted Sony PlayStation Game. The Golden Joystick Awards, it was nominated for Best Visual Design. And the Steam Awards, it was nominated for Outstanding Story Rich Game. You got that. So. nice.
Like it deserves all of it. And it's also the kind of thing too where there were so many big games, like titans of the industry at once in 2023 that I do think this was easy to kind of get lost just in the cascade of all these great games that were coming out. But I do encourage people to go back and give it a try because it's just in another year where there wasn't quite as many things, I think this would have dominated more of the conversation.
Yeah, 2023, you had Metroid Prime Remastered, you had Resident Evil 4 Remake, you had Street Fighter 6, you had Marvel Spider-Man 2, you had Super Mario Brothers Wonder, you had Alan Wake 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Legend of Zelda, Tears of the
Yeah,
Kingdom there. So yeah, you had a lot of that.
it was
Hi-Fi
a massive year. There's just so much that year.
Yeah. So high praise from Tim and Sage for Lies of P. Both give it This Is Cinema. Very nice. Yeah. Did you want to do Shadows or did you want to do Clay Obscure Expedition 33?
Let's do Expedition 33.
All right. Let's cue that up. All right.